right, so a morbilliform rash. Let me tell you another couple of points about morbilliform rashes. I don't know why. And you're going to find the longer you go through your clinical practice, you're going to run into these things that you just observe and you just know it, but you don't know why. And it is with a morbilliform rash. I don't know why. But when patients have a viral infection and they get exposed to an antibiotic, especially penicillin, they develop a morbilliform rash. They just do. Let me give you some examples. I'll bet you that in this room we have a lot of people who, when you were a little kid, you got tagged with a penicillin allergy because somebody gave you amoxicillin and strep was not what you had. You had a viral infection. You had a viral infection, we gave you an antibiotic, you had a morbilliform rash, not hives. Common in kids. In adolescents, commonly. You know, you never give penicillin to a patient who's got what famous viral infection? Mono. Why? Because they develop a morbilliform rash. If you give them penicillin again, they're going to have the same reaction, but it doesn't escalate with repeated exposure. So we see it in adolescents. I just told you how we saw it in kids. We can see it in adults as well. And this is a common one. I mean, it's not common, but it's a common example. It is when an adult has a viral infection on board called HIV, and somebody gives them Bactrim. They end up with a morbilliform rash. In fact, sometimes we don't know they have HIV. They end up with a morbilliform rash after Bactrim, and then somebody says, hey, wait a minute, and they do an HIV test. I don't know why it happens. It just does. So, viral infection on board, come in contact with an antibiotic, they get a morbilliform rash. So just look for it. You'll see it over and over again in clinical practice. So that's the famous morbilliform rash. So why do you need to know about the beta-lactam ring? Because of allergies. The second reason you need to know about the beta-lactam ring is because of an enzyme called beta-lactamase. Beta-lactamase is an enzyme that smart bacteria learn how to make. Because if you're a smart bacterium, when you wake up in the morning, you have one thought. I want to live another day. I'll do anything to live another day. I'll even learn how to make beta-lactamase. Because if you're a smart bacterium and you know how to make beta-lactamase and somebody tries to kill you by dumping penicillin all over you, all you have to do is look, squirt out your beta-lactamase, and when it hits the beta-lactam ring of the penicillin molecule, the blue box collapses. And it isn't penicillin. And it can't kill you. And you get to live another day. So, if you're a smart bacterium and you know how to make beta-lactamase, and somebody tries to kill you by dumping a cephalosporin all over you, all you have to do is look, squirt out your beta-lactamase. When it hits the beta-lactam ring in the cephalosporin molecule, the blue box collapses. It's not a cephalosporin, and it can't kill you or any of your best pals. So this is what you ought to be thinking right now. Wow, Amelie, once an organism knows how to make beta-lactamase, they're a lot harder to kill, huh? Mm-hmm. So, some smart chemist said, hey, wait a minute. I cannot believe we're going to be outsmarted by these little unicellular organisms. I got a really good idea. I know what we could do. Why don't we take some cheapo depot amoxicillin? Cheap old amoxicillin. And why don't we just put a cover over the blue box? Let's protect it. Let's cover up the blue box so that when a bug squirts out its beta-lactamase, it'll hit the cover and it won't hit the ring, the blue box. Well, they did that with amoxicillin. You know the name of that antibiotic. What is it? It's augmentin, exactly. So when an organism can squirt out beta-lactamase, if you give amoxicillin, the bug wins. If you give augmentin, the prescriber wins. The patient wins. You got it? So why do you need to know about the beta-lactam ring? Because you have to understand the concept of beta-lactamase. So, oh my goodness, augmentin worked great. Prescribers like us said, wow, we love that beta-lactamase coverage. Hey, wait a minute. The cephalosporins have a blue box. Chemists, can you cover the blue box of the cephalosporins? And what did the chemists say? Oh, no, that's too expensive. We'll cover the third generation cephalosporins and that's it. And they did. I'll show them to you in a minute. Do you have those concepts in your brain? Easy, easy. So let's talk about the antibiotics. Because once you understand what antibiotics kill what bugs, it's going to all come together for you. If you have those Amelie's antibiotic cards, you could pull them out right now. If you don't, that's okay. The content is in here. Let me show them to you. The very first antibiotic ever to be discovered was discovered by Alexander Fleming. He was a microbiologist. And you know, microbiologists grow bugs, and they grow them on petri dishes. Well, Alexander Fleming grew this bug, and it created this mold. And the mold was really penicillin. Now, when Alexander Fleming's penicillin came out, it was in the early 40s. You know what was going on historically? World War II. So here's what happened when U.S. had soldiers that were injured on the battlefield who became subsequently infected by their battlefield wounds. The U.S. had penicillin. They would get a shot of penicillin and they would overcome their battlefield wounds. People in other countries didn't have that advantage. So Alexander Fleming deserves a much higher place in World War II history than he probably has. So listen, you probably have older parents or maybe even grandparents who got the first generation of Alexander Fleming's penicillin. If you were allergic to mold, you would be allergic to Alexander Fleming's penicillin because it was made from mold. Today, 100% of penicillin is made from recombinant DNA. So even if you're allergic to mold, which a third of the people in this room probably are, you wouldn't have an allergic reaction to penicillin because it's no longer made with a mold. But of all the antibiotics with allergenicity, you know the penicillins are some of the top, all right, or the top antibiotic. So let's talk about the penicillins. The plain old penicillins are drugs like ampicillin, amoxicillin, PenVK, penicillin G, plain old penicillins. What are the bugs do they kill? They kill gram-positive bugs. In fact, what gram-positive bugs? Strep, like strep throat, which is why we give penicillin first line. Not staph. If a patient's got a staph infection, we're not putting them on penicillin. We could use it for enterococcus. So you see this box right here underneath your information? This box includes the names of organisms that plain old penicillin will kill. And I want you to look at the names of some of those bugs. Strep, group A, group B, group C, group G. Strep pneumo. The bug that I told you had the highest rate of mortality with pneumonia. Strep pneumo. Plain old penicillin kills it. So right now, this might be what you're thinking. Hey, Amelie. All right, you telling me amoxicillin kills strep pneumo, drug-resistant strep pneumo, even the one we've been given a respiratory quinolone for this morning? Mm-hmm. Really? You can get plain old penicillin for that? Mm-hmm. You got to give enough. So what dose of amoxicillin do we use to kill drug-resistant strep pneumo? You should know it because it's in the brand new pneumonia guidelines. It's 1 gram 3 times a day. That's it. Or 2 grams BID. It kills drug-resistant strep pneumo. So what about the dose we use for peds? Well, we use high-dose amoxicillin in kids too for 2 reasons. One is community-acquired pneumonia, And the other is otitis media. We use high-dose penicillin. In kids, we use 90 milligrams per kilogram per day. Divided doses, 90 mgs per kg per day in divided doses. And there's a caveat. We never give a kid, when you calculate that dosage, you never give them more than an adult dosage, right? So there it is. So a gram 3 times a day would be the most you would give a kid. But really, it's an inexpensive way to treat a very bad bug called strep pneumo. You got it? All right. So let's keep going. We talked about Augmentin and we talked about covering the blue box. Well, that's amoxicillin with clavulanic acid. Clavulanic acid is a potassium salt. That's really what it is. And that's what sits on top of the blue box and protects it. So what does Augmentin kill? It kills gram-positive bugs because, after all, it's amoxicillin. It kills organisms that know how to squirt out beta-lactamase because its blue box is covered. And you know what else happened when we covered the blue box? We got coverage of a bunch of gram-negative organisms. Like, wow. This antibiotic and all of its generics have a pretty broad spectrum of activity. It kills gram-positives, gram-negatives, and the beta-lactamase producers. You know what it does not kill? It does not kill MRSA. So you would never give Augmentin for MRSA. And it doesn't kill the atypical pathogens, like the one that causes walking pneumonia. What's the name of that bug? Mycoplasma pneumoniae. You would never give Augmentin to treat mycoplasma because mycoplasma is an atypical pathogen, and even Augmentin doesn't get rid of it. But Augmentin does a good job of some other bugs. Let's keep going. Right now, there's got to be somebody in this room who's thinking, hey, Amelie, I get the deal about the blue box, and I get the deal about covering it up, and I get the deal about bugs learning how to squirt out the enzyme that crushes the blue box. But how on earth would I know that a bug was smart enough to know that and know how to do that? How would I know? The answer's simple. You always suspect that an organism knows how to make beta-lactamase if the patient has had an antibiotic in the last 90 days. If the patient has had an antibiotic in the last 90 days and they're sick again today, you have to suspect that the organism making them sick today knows how to make beta-lactamase. You remember when we looked at pneumonia and we looked at comorbidities? And one of the little things in there was recent antibiotic exposure. We have to step up our treatment. It's exactly why. Because when bugs have recently been exposed to antibiotics and a patient gets another infection, it's going to be hard to kill them. All right? So that's how you know. Everybody got it. I'm switching drug classes. Let's talk about the sulfonamides. I mentioned to you this morning about trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, also known as Bactrim or Septra. We talked about that as being a plan B for eradication of what organism? Pertussis, Bordetella pertussis. We'd rather go with a macrolide, but if we couldn't, we would go with a sulfonamide. Why else do we use a drug like Bactrim? Well, it kills some gram-negative organisms, which is why we use it, and we have used it so much for urinary tract infections. And the most common urinary tract pathogen is what? E. coli. Well, unfortunately, we've used so much Bactrim to treat UTIs that we got a load of Bactrim-resistant E. coli. They've learned how to develop resistance to Bactrim, and you're in the heart of it. In South Texas, in Houston, you have so many cases of Bactrim. Cases, I mean like boxes cases, coming over from Mexico that people use to treat infections, that you have some of the highest E. coli resist rates in the whole country, right here in South Texas. So a good first choice for a urinary tract treatment for one of your patients is probably not going to be Bactrim. I might give it if I thought cost was a huge issue, but that would not be my first choice if it was 2 days before my certification exam and I had a UTI. I wouldn't want any part of Bactrim. I want something with a way better track record of killing E. coli. You got it? We'll talk about that shortly. So We do use loads of Bactrim to treat MRSA, right? We use it for MRSA. I don't know why it works. MRSA is gram-positive, and Bactrim treats mostly gram-negative pathogens. I don't know why it works, but it does. Let me ask you something. Do you see why we would never use Bactrim to treat strep throat? Strep is gram-positive, and Bactrim treats the gram-negative bugs. You got it? All right. Let's keep going. What about the tetracyclines? Excuse me. The tetracyclines, we mentioned this morning when we were talking about treating atypical pneumonia. You remember we said pneumonia without comorbidities? Amoxicillin, doxycycline, and the macrolides. Well, let's talk about the tetracyclines. An example of that is doxycycline, minocycline, vibromycin. When you give that to a patient, you are specifically treating either gram-negative pathogens or atypical organisms like mycoplasma. But you know what else we can use doxycycline for? We can use it to treat MRSA, community-acquired MRSA. I want you to use Bactrim as your first choice because it has a little bit higher eradication rate. But if a patient's got MRSA and they are sulfa allergic, what antibiotic could you use? Doxycycline. Suppose a patient had community-acquired MRSA and they had just had Bactrim 4 weeks ago for MRSA, and now they got MRSA again. You could go back with doxycycline. So let me ask you another question. Would you ever use doxycycline to treat strep throat? No. Why not? Because it doesn't treat the gram-positive bugs, and strep is gram-positive. You following me? All right, keep walking with me. Let's talk about the cephalosporins, and this slide kind of gives you the 10,000-foot view when we talk about antibiotics. So the first generation cephalosporins kill gram-positives. The second generation cephalosporins kill gram-positives and gram-negatives. The third generation cephalosporins kill gram-positives, gram-negatives, and the beta-lactamase producers. All right, you with me? Let's take a look. The first generation cephalosporins, I think you know them well. It's Keflex and Duracef. When do you give a patient Keflex and Duracef? For what kind of infections? Skin and skin structure infections. What grows on your skin? Staph, gram-positive. What do the first generations kill? Gram-positive organisms. The second generation cephalosporins, those are drugs like Ceftin, Ceclor, Cefzil. Those are second generations. They kill both gram-positives and gram-negatives. Do they kill atypical pathogens? Nope. Do they kill MRSA? Nope. Do they kill organisms that know how to make beta-lactamase? Nope. But the third generations do. We have some old third generations and we have the newer third generations. The older ones are drugs like Cedax and Suprax. The newer ones are drugs like Vantin and Spectracef and Omnicef. And that's what Rocephin is. When you give somebody a Rocephin injection, you probably are giving it to them because they're very sick. The third generations kill gram-positives, gram-negatives, and the beta-lactamase producers. As wonderful as Rocephin is, does it kill atypical pathogens like atypical pneumonia? No. If somebody has mycoplasma, you can give them all the Rocephin you want. It won't touch it. If somebody's got MRSA, you can give them all the Rocephin you want. It won't touch MRSA. So the third generations cover a lot, but there's some that they don't cover, like atypical pneumonia. So you never heard peep about Rocephin today when we talked about pneumonia.